Have you ever felt like your life is falling apart, and no matter what you do, nothing seems to get better? What if I told you this chaos is not punishment but precision, life's way of preparing you for something much greater? Carl Jung believed transformation doesn't happen in peace, but in disorder. Stay with me as we uncover why your darkest moments may actually be the start of your greatest growth. Think about the last time something in your life collapsed without warning. Maybe it was losing a job you'd built your identity around for years. In that moment, it feels like the ground has opened beneath you. You're not just losing a paycheck or a routine, you're losing the version of yourself that made sense in that world. The routines, the validation, the sense of purpose all dissolve at once. It's a raw, uncomfortable emptiness, and your first instinct is to see it as failure or punishment. But what if it isn't? What if this is the universe's most precise intervention, stripping away everything that no longer serves you, even if you can't see it yet? Carl Jung believed that transformation demands disorder. He argued that the unconscious doesn't gently nudge us toward change. It uses chaos to break down the parts of us that have become rigid, outdated, or unhealthy. As he put it, man needs difficulties. They are necessary for health. This isn't just a philosophical idea. When your life unravels, it's not a random misfortune or a cosmic mistake. It's a targeted process, a kind of psychological surgery, meant to remove what's stagnant within you. The pain you feel is real, but it's also a sign that something inside you is being forced to shift. Most people are taught to fear this process. The moment life gets uncomfortable, the reflex is to panic, to scramble for control, to try to patch things up and return to normal. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Normal wasn't working. The universe, or your unconscious mind, recognizes when you're stuck. It knows when you're clinging to routines, relationships, or beliefs that no longer fit who you're becoming. So it intervenes. It dismantles what you won't let go of voluntarily. The result is chaos, and it feels like you're being broken down. But in reality, you're being prepared for something better. Let's get specific. Imagine the end of a long-term relationship. It hurts, not just because you miss the other person, but because you're forced to confront all the ways you depended on them for your sense of worth. You replay conversations, question your choices, and wonder if you'll ever feel whole again. But beneath the heartbreak is a deeper process. The universe is pushing you to examine the parts of yourself you ignored, the needs, boundaries, and values you may have set aside to keep the relationship going. The breakup is a catalyst, exposing what you've outgrown and demanding that you grow into something new. The same pattern shows up in betrayal. When someone you trust turns on you, it's easy to fixate on the pain, the anger, the confusion. But if you look closer, betrayal is a mirror. It forces you to ask why you allowed certain behaviors, why you ignored red flags, and what you were afraid to face about yourself. The chaos isn't just in what happened. It's in the confrontation with your own patterns. Without the disruption, you might have stayed blind to what needed changing. The suffering, as Jung saw it, isn't random. It's a tool for self-discovery. Yet, despite the value in these wake-up calls, most people resist. Discomfort is equated with failure, so we cling to what's familiar, even if it's holding us back. How many times have you heard someone say, "I just need to get back on track," as if the solution is to return to the old version of themselves? But life doesn't move backward. The urge to patch things up and retreat to comfort is strong, but it's also what keeps you from growing. Jung's view flips this thinking. Chaos isn't the end. It's the clearing of the path for something new to emerge. There's a reason this process feels so personal, so targeted. It's not just about losing a job, a relationship, or a friend. It's about being forced to confront the one battle inside you that chaos is truly targeting, a conflict you might not even realize you're fighting. I'll reveal exactly what that battle is in a moment, but for now, know that the discomfort you feel is a sign you're being pushed beyond your limits for a reason. So, the next time you find yourself in the middle of upheaval, try asking different questions. Instead of, "Why is this happening to me?" ask, "What is this trying to remove from my life? What part of me have I outgrown?" When you shift your perspective, you start to see the design in the destruction. The universe, or your unconscious, isn't trying to torment you. It's trying to transform you. The chaos is a recalibration, a stripping away of what no longer fits, so that something stronger can take its place. But the real difference doesn't come from the chaos itself. It comes from how you respond to it. Will you fight to hold on to what's falling apart, or will you let the process unfold and see what it's trying to reveal? That's the choice that determines whether you stay stuck or move forward. There's a deeper layer to this process that most people never address. The chaos isn't just about your circumstances, it's about the parts of yourself you try hardest to ignore, and that's where the real transformation begins. Let's get honest about what's really at the core of upheaval, the parts of yourself you most want to escape, the shadow you can't outrun. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the hidden side of your personality, made up of everything you'd rather not acknowledge. It's the jealousy you feel when a friend gets what you wanted, the resentment that creeps in when you're overlooked, the fear of failure that gnaws at you every time you consider taking a risk. Most people spend their lives working overtime to bury these traits, convinced that if they ignore them long enough, they'll disappear. But the truth is, the more you push these feelings away, the more power they have over you. Think about a moment when you felt left behind while someone else moved forward. Maybe you congratulated them, but inside you felt a bitter twist, resentment mixed with envy and a sharp fear that you'll never measure up. You brush it off, tell yourself you're above those emotions, but that's just the ego talking, desperate to maintain an image of who you think you should be. The reality is, those feelings don't vanish. They slip underground, shaping your reactions, your choices, and even your sense of self-worth. You might find yourself sabotaging opportunities, lashing out at people you care about, or withdrawing entirely, never realizing these are just your shadow's fingerprints. Jung was clear about this. The shadow isn't evil, and it isn't something to be destroyed. It's simply the side of you that you've learned to hide because it doesn't fit the story you want to tell about yourself. The ego, the part of you that craves control and approval, works hard to keep the shadow out of sight. If you tell yourself you're always generous, it feels dangerous to admit to envy. If you see yourself as strong, it's embarrassing to confront your insecurities. But denying these traits doesn't erase them. It only creates a split within you. This internal split is why so many people feel stuck. On the outside, you might look put together, hardworking, even successful. But underneath, there's a constant tension, a battle between the self you show the world and the self you're running from. You overcompensate at work to prove you're not afraid of failing. You become overly agreeable in relationships to hide your resentment. You push yourself to exhaustion to outrun your doubts. But none of this brings peace. The more you resist your shadow, the more it leaks out in ways you can't control. Jung warned, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This is why acknowledgement matters. The shadow doesn't just sit quietly in the background. When ignored, it seeps into your decisions, your relationships, and your self-image. It's the reason you repeat the same patterns, attract the same conflicts, and feel like you're living someone else's life. You think you're unlucky or that life is unfair, but what's really happening is your shadow is calling the shots from behind the scenes. Let's make this real. Imagine someone who's terrified of being seen as weak. They work harder than anyone else, never ask for help, and always put on a brave face. But underneath, there's a deep fear of inadequacy, one they refuse to admit. Instead of facing it, they become hypercritical of others, lash out when they feel threatened, or withdraw when things get tough. The fear they won't acknowledge becomes the very thing that shapes their life. This is how the shadow operates, not as a villain, but as an unseen driver of your behavior. The ego resists this kind of self-examination. It wants to protect you from discomfort, to keep your identity intact. But that protection comes at a cost. You end up living a smaller life, boxed in by the very traits you're trying to avoid. The irony is, what you resist persists. The more you deny your shadow, the more it sabotages your efforts to grow. The cycle continues until you finally decide to look at what you've been running from. Facing your shadow isn't about self-criticism or shame. It's about honesty and acceptance. When you admit to jealousy, self-doubt, or resentment, you're not declaring yourself broken. You're simply recognizing that you're human. The act of bringing these traits into the light doesn't make you weak. It makes you whole. Jung believed that integrating the shadow, accepting both your strengths and your flaws, was the only path to real transformation. When you stop pretending, you begin to understand why you feel what you feel and why you do what you do. The grip of old patterns loosens, and you start to act from a place of awareness rather than compulsion. This isn't easy. The ego will fight back, insisting that you don't need to go there, that it's safer to keep things as they are. But the cost of that safety is stagnation. Growth requires discomfort, the discomfort of seeing yourself clearly, without filters. But the payoff is freedom. When you stop hiding from your shadow, you reclaim the energy you wasted on denial and self-defense. You become less reactive, more compassionate, and more open to change. Think about what could shift if you stopped fighting the parts of yourself you hate. What would you do with all the energy you've spent on resistance? Imagine what it would feel like to move through the world without that constant internal battle. Curious? We'll see how next. There's a point in every real transformation where you're forced to confront the part of you that refuses to let go. Not the pain of loss itself, but the stubborn, familiar self-image you've relied on for years. This is where ego death begins, the painful gateway to lasting change. Ego death isn't about losing everything, it's about letting the old version of you burn away so something stronger can grow in its place. Think of it like a forest fire. It looks like total destruction, but it clears out the weak growth, making space for a healthier, more resilient forest to emerge. That's what happens inside you when the ego finally breaks down. The ego's main job has always been survival. It builds a story around your achievements, your relationships, and the masks you wear to feel safe. At first, these stories help you navigate the world. Over time, though, they become cages. The ego clings to what's familiar, even if it no longer serves you. It tells you to stick with the job that drains you, to stay in the relationship that's run its course, to keep pretending you're the person others expect you to be. The thought of leaving that behind feels like stepping off a cliff, and the ego will do anything to keep you from taking that leap. But the truth is, transformation demands that you let go. The suffering you feel during times of change isn't just about what you're losing. It's about the ego's desperate fight to keep you from stepping into the unknown. The old identity, whether it's the dependable one, the successful one, or the strong one, starts to crack. You grieve not just for the job or the relationship, but for the self you thought you were. That grief is real, It's the pain of watching the stories you've built collapse. Yet, as harsh as it feels, this is the necessary price for growth. Carl Jung understood this struggle deeply. He saw ego death as a rite of passage, a process where the self-image you've clung to is stripped away so you can discover what's real underneath. Jung called this the sacred void between collapse and reconstruction. It's a space that feels empty, even frightening, because you're no longer sure who you are or where you're headed. But that emptiness isn't abandonment. It's the clearing where something new can take root. Picture someone whose whole sense of self is tied to being the strong one. They're the person everyone relies on, the one who never lets their guard down. When life finally pushes them to the edge, maybe through burnout or a crisis, they're forced to admit that the strength they projected was often a mask for their own fear of vulnerability. The collapse of that mask feels devastating. But in that moment, the space opens up to ask, who am I if I'm not performing for others? What do I truly need now that I can't hide behind the old role? This is the gift hidden inside ego death. It strips away the illusions so you can finally see yourself as you are, not as you've pretended to be. Most people resist this process. The ego whispers that you should just patch things up, return to the old routines, and get back to normal. But the reality is, normal wasn't working. The more you resist, the more you suffer. Suffering isn't the enemy here. It's the signal that the old boundaries are being crossed, that something inside you is demanding to change. The ego will fight for control, but the more you cling, the more you feel stuck. This in-between phase, the sacred void, is uncomfortable. It's marked by uncertainty, by questions that don't have easy answers. You might feel lost, unmoored, unsure of what comes next. But this is also where honesty becomes possible. You can finally look at the patterns you've repeated, the fears you've tried to hide, and the illusions you've maintained for the sake of safety. It's a time for deep introspection, not because you're broken, but because you're ready to rebuild from a place of truth. The reconstruction that follows ego death doesn't happen overnight. You don't wake up with a new identity fully formed. Instead, you start to move differently. You stop needing constant validation. You stop negotiating with your intuition or demanding guarantees before you act. There's a quiet confidence that comes from knowing you can handle what's ahead, even if you don't have all the answers. The new self that emerges is built on honesty, not performance. You become someone who can trust the process, who doesn't need to cling to an old story just to feel safe. This is why ego death, as brutal as it can be, isn't the end of the road. It's the beginning of something more authentic. The pain you experience isn't punishment. It's the cost of stepping into a life that fits who you really are, not who you were pretending to be. When you stop bargaining with life and let go of the roles you've outgrown, you create space for genuine change. But if you're like most people, you might notice something strange after all this. Even when you've faced ego death, even when you've grieved the old self and started to rebuild, you can find yourself stuck in the same cycles, repeating the same mistakes, running into the same frustrations, watching the same patterns play out in new forms. Why does life keep circling back to the same lessons, no matter how much you think you've changed? That's a question worth exploring. Patterns have a way of showing up in your life disguised as new opportunities, new relationships, or new jobs, but underneath, the same frustrations keep surfacing. Maybe you notice the same kind of disappointment, the same feeling of being overlooked, or the same exhaustion that follows you from one situation to the next. It's not just coincidence. These aren't random events. There's a reason the same lesson keeps reappearing, even when you're convinced you've moved on. The real question isn't why life is so repetitive. It's what these cycles are trying to show you about yourself. Let's get specific. Say you have trouble saying no. At first, it's classmates asking for favors, then it's colleagues piling tasks onto your plate, and later it's partners expecting you to handle everything. The faces change, but your response doesn't. You say yes, even when you're overwhelmed, and end up feeling used and invisible. It's tempting to blame the people around you, but the common thread is your own inability to set boundaries. Life keeps arranging new scenarios, but until you change your response, the outcome stays the same. This isn't about being cursed or unlucky. It's about the unconscious mind demanding your attention. Jung understood this better than anyone. He believed the unconscious mind uses repetition like a teacher. If the lesson isn't learned, the quiz keeps coming. The patterns in your life are not punishments, they're signals. Each time you ignore the message, the unconscious finds a new way to present it, hoping you'll finally notice. Most people misread these cycles as personal failure. You might think, why do I keep ending up here? What's wrong with me? That frustration is real, but it's also a distraction from the real work. The point isn't to shame yourself for not having figured it out sooner. The point is to recognize the pattern and ask, what is this trying to teach me? The moment you turn your focus inward, you take the first step toward breaking the loop. Look at trust issues. Maybe you've been betrayed, so you build walls. You keep people at arm's length, convinced it's safer that way. But then you notice a pattern. You attract people who either betray you again or who never get close enough to matter. The unconscious isn't punishing you, it's inviting you to heal the original wound. Until you do, you'll keep finding yourself in the same kind of relationship, no matter how different the circumstances seem. The repetition isn't random, it's a deliberate strategy. The unconscious wants balance, healing, and integration. When you suppress what hurts, thinking you can just move on, those unresolved issues don't disappear. They get recycled. The situations change, but the lesson remains. It's like being handed the same puzzle with different pieces over and over until you finally see the bigger picture. People often try to escape these cycles by changing their environment. They leave a job, end a relationship, move to a new city. But if you haven't addressed the root issue, the pattern just follows you. You find yourself in a new job with the same dynamics, or a new relationship with the same disappointments. The scenery changes, but the story repeats. It's not about what's happening around you, it's about what's happening inside you. Breaking free from these loops starts with honesty. You have to admit the role you play in your own story. That doesn't mean blaming yourself for everything that happens. It means recognizing that you're the constant in every scenario. The unconscious creates these situations not to punish you, but to push you toward growth. Every repeated lesson is a mirror, reflecting the part of you that needs attention. This process is uncomfortable. It's easier to point fingers, to say other people are the problem, or to believe you're just unlucky. But the truth is, the pattern will keep repeating until you decide to do something different. That's the real challenge. Can you respond in a new way, even when every instinct tells you to do what you've always done? The cycle only breaks when you do. Jung believed that self-awareness is the turning point. Once you see the pattern for what it is, you can start to make different choices. That doesn't mean you'll get it right every time. Change is awkward, and it rarely feels natural at first. But each time you act differently, set a boundary, trust someone worthy, walk away from what drains you, you weaken the old pattern's hold on you. You don't need to be perfect. The goal isn't to eliminate every mistake, but to recognize when you're falling back into the same loop and make a conscious decision to try something new. Over time, those small choices add up. The pattern loses its grip, and you start to experience life differently, not because the world changed, but because you did. These cycles are not barriers, they're invitations. Each repetition is the unconscious mind's way of asking, "Are you ready to learn this lesson?" When you finally say yes, when you stop resisting and start responding with awareness, you open the door to real change. The freedom you're looking for isn't outside of you. It's in the choice to act differently, even when it's hard. Next, we'll uncover the crucial step that moves you from recognizing these loops to finally breaking them. Change begins the moment you stop waiting for life to make you ready and instead choose to act, even when you feel least prepared. Action, the catalyst for transformation. Most people spend years imagining a different life, rehearsing what they would do if only the timing were right, if only they felt a little less afraid. You picture the next step, the new chapter, the better version of yourself. But when it's time to move, hesitation takes over. The mind offers up excuses. It's not the right time. What if I fail? The comfort of waiting feels safe, but it's really a disguise, an invisible wall that keeps your life exactly as it is. The mind's job is to keep you from risk, to keep you comfortable. But comfort is the real trap. It's the reason so many dreams remain unlived. Here's the truth. Wanting change is passive. Wishing for a new outcome is passive. Nothing shifts until you take action, until you make a decision to move forward despite discomfort. The mind is clever at rationalizing inaction. I'll start when I have more money, or I'll face this when I feel stronger. But these are just stories designed to protect the old self, to keep things familiar. The real obstacle isn't the world outside, it's your own resistance to stepping into the unknown. Jung understood this well. He believed that transformation isn't theorized in comfort, it's forged in the fall itself. You don't grow by preparing endlessly for the leap. You grow by leaping, by letting the action itself shape you in ways planning never could. Think back to the moments that truly changed you. Were they the ones you carefully orchestrated, or the ones that came out of chaos, when you had to act before you felt ready? Most breakthroughs aren't born from perfect timing. They come when everything is uncertain, when you're forced to choose between the discomfort of change and the pain of staying the same. Imagine the person who stays in a toxic relationship, telling themselves they'll leave when it feels easier. But life rarely gives you that comfort. Usually something breaks, a fight, a betrayal, a sudden glimpse of life outside the old pattern. In that moment, the only way forward is action. The decision to leave isn't made because you feel strong. It's made because you can't bear the alternative any longer. Action is the bridge between knowing and becoming. You can understand your patterns, analyze your fears, and talk about your goals endlessly, but nothing changes until you do something different. Embodying change means living it, not just thinking about it. It means stepping into new behaviors, setting boundaries, or walking away from what's familiar, even if you're full of doubt. The discomfort is real, but it's also the birthplace of transformation. Let's make this concrete. Maybe you struggle with self-worth, so you keep people around who don't respect you. You read every book, listen to every podcast, and convince yourself you're preparing for change. But when someone crosses your boundary again, you hesitate, you rationalize. Their behavior, afraid of what will happen if you finally stand up for yourself. That's the crossroads. It's not another mental rehearsal that's needed. It's action. Do you set the boundary, or do you fall back into the old pattern? The moment you choose differently, even if your voice shakes, you begin to transform. This is what Jung meant by internal transformation. The world doesn't rearrange itself to meet your intentions. It responds to who you become through your choices. When you act differently, when you set a new boundary, speak your truth, or leave what you've outgrown, your external reality shifts to reflect your new self. But this process demands sacrifice. You have to let go of comfort, the illusion of stability, and sometimes the roles you played to survive. If you've always been the peacemaker, standing up for yourself feels like betrayal, not to others, but to the version of yourself that needed to be liked. That pain is real, but it's also necessary. Here's something most people miss. You don't need to feel ready to take action. Waiting for readiness is one of the mind's oldest tricks. Readiness doesn't come before the leap. It's created by the leap itself. People often discover their strength not before they act, but in the act of doing. Change demands alignment, showing up as the version of yourself who lives the transformation, not just dreams of it. You don't wait for permission. You don't wait for the fear to disappear. You move forward with the fear, knowing it's part of the process. What would you risk today if you knew the fear you feel is proof you're on the right path? This isn't about reckless decisions or grand gestures. It's about the small daily choices that pull you out of the patterns you've outgrown. The universe doesn't reward intention, it rewards embodiment. You can tell yourself you've changed, but until your actions reflect that, nothing truly shifts. Each choice to act differently, no matter how small, is a commitment to a new self. So ask yourself, what are you clinging to because letting go feels too painful? What pattern are you repeating because it's easier than facing the unknown? These aren't questions to analyze forever. They're prompts to move. Life doesn't transform because of what you wish. It transforms because of what you do, who you choose to become, and how you respond when discomfort demands more from you than you think you can give. Action doesn't erase fear or pain. It brings them into the open, where they can finally be faced. The process is uncomfortable. It can feel like loss, even grief. But the discomfort is the proof that you're changing. The universe meets you at the edge of your willingness to act, not at the threshold of your intentions. The moment you move, you create a ripple that changes everything around you. But what happens when the pain of change feels overwhelming? When discomfort isn't just a side effect, but the heart of the experience? That's where the real work begins, and it's where the truth about suffering and growth comes into focus. Suffering isn't just something you get through. It's the signal that something in you is ready to change. The truth about suffering and growth is that pain is not a punishment, and emptiness is not abandonment. These are the moments when life strips away the noise and distractions so you can finally see what needs to be rebuilt. This is the fertile ground left after the fire, not empty, but ready for a fresh start. We're raised to avoid suffering at all costs, to see it as a sign that we've messed up or that life has turned against us. But what if those moments you dread, the heartbreak, the loss, the emptiness, aren't evidence that you've failed? What if they're the universe's way of shaking you awake, forcing you to notice the cracks that have been there all along? Jung didn't see suffering as random or cruel. He saw it as life's way of pointing out the places that need healing. When life is comfortable, there's no reason to question your habits, your beliefs, or your identity. Discomfort, on the other hand, works like a spotlight. It exposes the patterns, wounds, and blind spots you've ignored. Think of shaking that reveals foundation cracks so you can rebuild stronger. Pain isn't punishment, it's inspection. When something precious falls apart, whether it's a relationship, a job, or a sense of certainty, the collapse feels brutal. But what if that emptiness is actually space being cleared for something new? The silence after loss isn't just a void, it's a pause between what was and what could be. In that pause, you have a choice. Patch over the cracks and pretend nothing happened, or face them and rebuild with intention. Remember that lowest point you feared would break you? What if it was actually the setup for your strongest self? Most people don't realize that suffering is the invitation to look at what's underneath the surface. You lose a friendship and feel unworthy, but maybe the pain is really exposing your fear of being alone. You get fired and spiral into self-doubt, but maybe the real message is that you've outgrown the old version of yourself. Suffering doesn't expose your flaws. It reveals where you're still unfinished, where growth is needed most. Jung argued that these moments of pain are not the end of your story. They're a test, a chance to decide if you'll hold on to the old self or let something new emerge. The emptiness you feel isn't a verdict on your worth. It's the space where you get to choose what comes next. Too often, people rush to fill that space with distractions, rebound relationships, or new jobs, desperate to avoid the discomfort. But the silence is where the answers live. It's where you finally face the truth about what you want, what you need, and who you're ready to become. Let's get practical. After a breakup, most people look for someone new right away, convinced that filling the void will make the pain go away. But the universe isn't asking you to fill the gap. It's asking you to sit with it, to learn from it, to understand what that relationship covered up in you. The discomfort is real, but it's also a teacher. It shows you the patterns you repeat, the boundaries you ignore, and the needs you bury. Only by facing the silence can you break the cycle. If you've ever lost a job or left a familiar environment, you know the feeling of standing in that empty space, unsure of what's next. It's tempting to see this as failure, but it's actually the moment when you're most open to change. The pain you feel is the pressure that cracks open the old shell. The emptiness is the invitation to decide, will you rebuild the same structure, or will you try something new? Jung believed that these periods of loss are not setbacks. They're the fertile ground where new life can take root. The hardest part is letting go of the old self. There's comfort in familiar pain, even if it keeps you stuck. Growth demands that you release the identities, roles, and stories that no longer fit. For something new to be born in you, something old has to disappear. That's not just a poetic idea. It's a psychological reality. The pain of letting go isn't a sign you're on the wrong path. It's proof that you're moving forward, even if every part of you wants to cling to what's familiar. The silence and discomfort you feel aren't dead ends. They're bridges between collapse and reconstruction. In that space, you get to decide whether you will be the repetition of your past or the beginning of something entirely different. The suffering isn't there to break you. It's there to make you honest. It forces you to confront the parts of yourself you'd rather ignore, to acknowledge the wounds, and to finally start the work of healing. So ask yourself, what if the pain you're experiencing isn't the universe closing a door, but opening a new one? What if the emptiness isn't the end, but the beginning of something you never imagined? The challenge isn't to avoid suffering, but to use it, to let it shape you, teach you, and prepare you for what's next. Transformation begins not when you escape your suffering, but when you accept it as the foundation for something better. The question isn't whether you'll experience pain, it's whether you'll allow it to change you. When you stop running and start building from within, you step onto the path of real growth.